The first sign something was wrong was when Enforcer Squad Theta opened their rations and found a live grenade inside the dessert pouch. The second sign was when the grenade exploded into confetti, followed by a speaker crackling to life and blasting ancient Earth music at full volume. As the enforcers scrambled for cover, unsure whether to laugh or return fire, a deep voice echoed from the hills. "Congratulations! You just failed the stupid test. Welcome to D-17. Command thought it was a prank. It wasn't. Within the next 3 hours, Theta's squad would be reduced to scrap metal and severed limbs, their armored corpses hung upside down from mining cranes like ornaments on a deranged holiday tree. The only thing left untouched was the confetti, still drifting gently through the air as if mocking them. And so began the single greatest failure in Dominion history, all triggered by one man they thought was long dead. Outpost D-17 didn't even appear on most Dominion maps. A dust ball colony of humans mining volatile minerals, barely worth the energy to conquer. But protocol dictated total subjugation of human settlements, especially those operating outside Dominion control. So the Galactic enforcers, polished and arrogant, touched down with tanks, orbital drones, and the kind of overconfidence that comes from never having lost a battle. They marched through the settlement unchallenged. No resistance. No threats. Just miners in stained jumpsuits watching silently as the enforcers planted their banners. One soldier scoffed. Another took a selfie beside a statue of some old Earth hero. Laughter echoed through the canyon. A bored lieutenant kicked over a vendor cart and yelled for silence. The miners said nothing. They didn't resist because they didn't need to. They knew he was still out there. Commander Rax, leading the operation, was a 7-foot-tall reptilian warlord with cybernetic limbs and an ego to match. He called this mission a training run for the new recruits. "These Earth apes love dramatics," he told his officers while sipping synthesized wine. "Crush a few buildings, fry their comms, and they'll cry for mercy by sundown." His troops agreed. They'd done this 100 times before. Every time the humans screamed. Every time they begged. This time was different. That night, an enforcer recon drone vanished mid-flight. Then a scout team failed to report in. At first, Rax thought it was faulty equipment. Then came the message. A transmission broadcast directly into the enforcer comms network. It was grainy, low resolution, but unmistakable. A helmeted figure stood in the dark, backlit by fire. His voice was low and calm. "You don't belong here. This is not your war. Leave now, or bury your own dead." The signal cut out. Some laughed. Others felt a chill. Rax growled and ordered a sweep. A team of 12 was dispatched to the eastern mining tunnels. They never came back. When the second team arrived to investigate, they found a message burned into the tunnel wall. "Still here." Beside it was a single armored gauntlet impaled on a mining drill, its fingers still twitching. That's when panic started to creep in. These weren't civilians. This wasn't a rebellion. This was something else entirely. By morning, 4 armored transports had been sabotaged. One exploded mid-takeoff, killing its crew. Another veered into a cliffside after its navigation system was hacked. Enforcers began to report seeing shadows moving too fast to follow. Drones lost signal. Sensors picked up nothing. Rax issued a kill-on-sight order. It didn't help. It only fed the fear. Back in the command tent, Rax reviewed the surveillance footage again and again. The figure was human. Massive. Armored. Fast. Unreasonably fast. No official records matched. Then one of his officers hesitantly offered a name spoken in whispers across former battlefields. A name erased from Dominion databases after a war they preferred to forget. Juggernaut. Supposedly killed 5 years ago during the siege of New Europa. Supposedly vaporized in a Dominion blast. But Rax wasn't laughing anymore. One of the younger enforcers, fresh out of academy, approached a local miner during the chaos. He asked about the figure. The miner, an old man missing 3 fingers, just smiled and spat into the dirt. "That ain't a man," he said. "That's what you made him. You bombed his wife. Shot his kid. Burned his town. Then you left. Thought he died. Didn't even check the body. He's what's left when you burn everything but the soul. The young enforcer blinked, unnerved. Is that a threat? He asked. The miner just laughed. No, son. That's a promise already kept. As the sun dipped below the canyon rim, the enforcers tried to rally. Rax ordered every remaining asset to deploy. Orbital scans. High-speed patrols. Underground sensors. He even summoned a personal security droid from orbit. But nothing prepared them for what happened next. At precisely midnight, every light in the base went out. Communications died. Drones dropped from the sky. And then the music returned. The same Earth song. Blasting through every helmet, every comm, every loudspeaker. The same voice echoed across the hills. I warned you. Explosions rocked the base. Smoke filled the sky. When visibility cleared, a lone figure stood atop the ridge, holding the severed head of a Dominion warbot like a trophy. His armor was dented, scarred, and patched with salvaged enforcer tech. His eyes glowed through a cracked visor. And on his chest, painted in blood-red strokes, was a word none of them wanted to read. Juggernaut. Rax stood frozen. For the first time in his decorated career, he felt something alien. Not rage. Not strategy. Fear. The kind that grabs your spine and squeezes. Juggernaut didn't speak. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the smoke like a ghost returning to the grave. The enforcers had conquered 1,000 planets. They had crushed rebellions, erased civilizations, and rewritten history in their own image. But here, on a forgotten outpost full of dust and ghosts, they had woken something worse than any resistance. They had made a monster. And he had been waiting. Ask ChatGPT. The Dominion called it a Class Z anomaly. That was their term for anything that didn't fit their playbook of domination. Juggernaut was now officially classified as one. High Command had sent a curt message to Commander Rax after the events of the previous night. Their tone was clear. Fix this quickly or be replaced. Rax, still recovering from the loss of over 20 elite units, swallowed his pride and deployed the Scorch Sweep Protocol, a method typically used for riot control on prison moons. Entire sections of the outpost were burned, searched, and scanned by armed hover drones. Innocent miners were rounded up, interrogated, and sometimes beaten just to satisfy the enforcer's need for control. But none of it brought Juggernaut into the open. He was always just out of reach, one step ahead, turning their strategies against them. At dawn, a patrol discovered a strange trail leading from the ruins of their destroyed mech bay. It wasn't footprints. It was crushed metal. Pieces of enforcer armor scattered like breadcrumbs, bent and blackened. Following the trail led them to a collapsed tunnel, one the maps showed hadn't existed until recently. Rax ordered an engineering team to dig through. What they found wasn't a tunnel, it was a burial site. The corpses of 6 enforcers, arranged in a line, each with their weapons melted into their armor, faces carved with symbols from Earth's ancient war myths. Above them, painted on the rock, was a crude drawing. A monstrous human figure standing over a pile of enforcer skulls. Beside it were 3 words: leave or burn. The tension among the troops grew unbearable. Elite warriors who had never questioned orders began hesitating at checkpoints, flinching at shadows, and whispering to each other about ghosts in the canyon. A technician on drone duty claimed he saw Juggernaut leap from a cliff and vanish midair. When questioned, he stammered and finally admitted he couldn't tell if it was real or a hallucination. Another soldier locked himself inside a storage pod and refused to come out, muttering about eyes watching from the ventilation shafts. Fear was becoming contagious. Commander Rax realized psychological warfare was at play, and it was working. So he brought in the Dominion PsyOps team to counter it. The PsyOps officer, a smug telepath named SOV Drow, claimed he could detect and neutralize any mental manipulation within hours. He walked into the interrogation chamber with the captured miner and exited 20 minutes later, drenched in sweat and completely silent. When Rax demanded a report, SOV stared blankly and whispered one word before collapsing: twitching on the floor. The word was him. That afternoon, the enforcers attempted their largest counterattack yet. 12 armored vehicles, 40 infantry, and 3 aerial bombers descended into the canyon where Juggernaut had last been seen. They expected resistance. What they got was silence. Not a single shot was fired as they advanced. Then, all at once, the ground beneath them exploded. The entire canyon floor had been wired with salvaged mining charges. 2 tanks were launched into the air like toys. A bomber lost control and spiraled into the cliffside. In the chaos, a single figure stepped into view through the smoke. Juggernaut walked calmly into their formation, unarmed. The enforcers opened fire. Every bullet, every plasma shot, hit nothing. It was a hologram. A decoy. The real Juggernaut had already infiltrated their rear command vehicle. Seconds later, it exploded, taking half the leadership squad with it. When the survivors returned, bloodied and stunned, they brought back something else. A helmet. Not an enforcer's. It was Juggernaut's. Cracked and burned, with a fresh inscription scratched into the forehead plate. A simple phrase etched in steel. Still not enough. The message spread through the ranks like wildfire. Morale hit rock bottom. Enforcers refused patrol duty. Some requested transfer off-world. Rax denied every request, furious and humiliated. He demanded a planetary lockdown. No ships in or out. Every available drone was sent to track Juggernaut. They searched caves, mines, and even the sewers. He was nowhere and everywhere. One moment he was recorded dismantling a security turret. The next he appeared on the other side of the base, disabling the food processors. It became clear he was moving through paths only the original miners knew, paths long sealed or forgotten. An intelligence officer studying Juggernaut's tactics finally presented a theory. He was using Dominion tech against them. Over the past 2 days, Juggernaut had scavenged enough armor, weapons, and drones to build a hybrid combat system beyond their understanding. He wasn't just fighting them. He was learning. Evolving. Each time they hit him, he adapted. When they blocked a tunnel, he used rooftops. When they scrambled signals, he hijacked their visual feeds. He'd turned the entire outpost into his personal hunting ground. And the Dominion were now the prey. In desperation, Rax ordered a full-scale civilian purge. If Juggernaut wouldn't show himself, perhaps the deaths of the miners would draw him out. Hundreds were rounded up and placed in holding pens. Screams echoed through the base as enforcers dragged families from their homes. But Juggernaut still didn't come. Not immediately. The response came a few hours later. A Dominion shuttle, scheduled to drop reinforcements, was intercepted mid-flight. Its pilot radioed in a mayday before going silent. The shuttle was found drifting, intact but empty, hovering just outside base perimeter. Inside was a single message displayed on the cockpit screen. "Touch them again and I'll tear your lungs out through your back." Rax, fuming, personally visited the civilian pens to make a show of strength. He ordered 3 miners executed. The soldiers hesitated. Then one raised his weapon. But before the trigger could be pulled, the lights shut off. The pens plunged into darkness. And then a scream. Not from the civilians. From the guard. When the lights flickered back, the soldier was gone. His armor lay empty, shattered. On the wall, scrawled in blood, was a single word. "Stop." The rest of the guards stepped back. No one fired another shot. Rax cursed, slammed his fists into the metal rail, and stormed out. As he exited, an old woman among the prisoners called out to him. Her voice was hoarse but steady. She said, "You think he's here to save us? He's not. He's here to punish you. The fact that we're still breathing means he hasn't finished yet." That night, in the war tent, Rax watched the same security footage over and over. Juggernaut standing in the fire. Juggernaut disappearing into smoke. Juggernaut watching, waiting. The commander turned to his last loyal officer and asked a question he'd never imagined himself saying. "How do you kill a ghost you made yourself?" Outside, somewhere in the ash-covered hills, Juggernaut was already laying the next trap. Not for a soldier. Not for a tank. but for the Dominion itself. The real war hadn't even started yet. The Dominion had always believed in control. Order through fear, compliance through overwhelming force. But nothing about Juggernaut fit into that doctrine. He didn't rebel like the others. He didn't make demands. He didn't ask for freedom. He didn't even speak unless it was to warn them before another massacre. And yet he had dismantled a third of Rax's battalion in 3 days using nothing but sabotage, stolen tech, and the power of his own myth. At this point, no one called him a human anymore. They whispered about him like a phantom, an ancient wrath made of steel and vengeance, born from the ruins they created and thriving in the terror they left behind. Rax sat in his command tent surrounded by flickering screens showing live feeds from across the outpost. Every monitor told the same story. Paranoia. Exhaustion. Deterioration. Patrols now moved in groups of 8 or more, and even then, they flinched at every echo. The standard helmet audio had to be disabled after Juggernaut began hacking into the comms to play recordings of enforcers begging for their lives before being torn apart. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal. No speeches. No politics. Just raw, surgical horror. But despite the chaos, Juggernaut still hadn't made a direct assault on the central command hub. That left Rax hopeful. Perhaps the ghost was limited. Perhaps he couldn't breach the heart of Dominion operations. So Rax doubled defenses. 24-hour drone coverage. Anti-personnel mines. Thermal cannons at every entry point. He even installed a secondary kill switch in case any officer turned traitor. His paranoia mirrored that of his troops, but his pride wouldn't let him see it. Meanwhile, in the shadows of a collapsed mining shaft, Juggernaut stood watching through a cracked infrared lens. His armor, now upgraded with scavenged enforcer plating, pulsed faintly with heat signatures. The Dominion's tech may have been sophisticated, but it lacked resilience. He had learned their patterns, studied their comm frequencies, and now, with each strike, he wasn't just hurting them. He was learning from them. Adapting faster than any AI ever had. The damage he had done wasn't random. Every death was part of a pattern. Every explosion was a piece of a larger plan. And the next step of that plan was infiltration. Under cover of night, during a scheduled drone maintenance blackout, Juggernaut executed one of his boldest moves. He hijacked a Dominion supply crawler transporting fresh mech components. The guards were drugged with a nerve agent distilled from local flora. Silent. Painless. Efficient. Juggernaut entered the crawler, disguised himself using armor from a fallen enforcer lieutenant, and drove straight through the main gate without resistance. The command base, paranoid and overstretched, didn't notice. He walked among them for 23 minutes. He marked every generator, mapped out the location of their AI core, and installed a virus-laced drive into the primary uplink. Before leaving, he walked past Rax's tent and stopped just outside the canvas wall. He stood still. Listening. Rax was speaking to a subordinate, frustrated voice raised. He spoke of wiping out the civilians completely. Juggernaut memorized every word. Then he quietly walked away. Before morning, he had already vanished into the canyon again. The virus began its work the following day. It didn't destroy systems. It didn't even alert the Dominion's firewalls. It simply copied data, patterns, codes, rotations, weak points. Juggernaut was preparing for something bigger. But even as he planned, a different threat emerged. A Dominion countermeasure known as Project Redemption arrived on the planet's orbit. A cybernetic enforcer named Vectalos. He wasn't a commander. He wasn't even entirely organic. He was part of the Dominion's oldest elite. Half machine, half policy. Built to crush uprisings and dissect the minds of war criminals. He had been deployed only twice in the last decade. Both planets no longer existed. When Talos arrived, he didn't speak to Rax. He didn't salute. He walked into the base with a squad of 6 silent operatives, each wearing armor blackened by previous battles, and took control without a word. Rax protested. Talos simply stared at him, then sent a signal that temporarily deactivated all weapons in the room. That was all the conversation needed. Talos believed in results. He analyzed Juggernaut's attacks like a puzzle. Within hours, he concluded Juggernaut wasn't fighting blindly. He had a target. A schedule. A logic that suggested the ghost wasn't unhinged, but tactical. So Talos flipped the board. Instead of chasing Juggernaut, he set a trap. He released 3 Enforcer prisoners into the wild, bait, outfitted with hidden trackers and explosives. One had a wound that leaked coolant. Another screamed for help. The third whispered the word Juggernaut over and over like a chant. They wandered the canyon, stumbling, bleeding. The idea was simple. Lure Juggernaut into a rescue. Detonate. Retrieve the remains. End the threat. But Juggernaut didn't take the bait. Instead, he intercepted the tracking signals, duplicated them, and sent them back laced with a feedback loop. The moment Talos triggered the detonation, the explosives malfunctioned and wiped out one of his own surveillance drones hovering too close. The prisoners were already gone, rescued not by Juggernaut, but by miners disguised as wildlife scavengers. Juggernaut had anticipated the trap before it was even set. Talos wasn't impressed. He was curious. That night, Juggernaut struck again. But this time, not with bombs or traps. He hacked into the Dominion's propaganda network and streamed a message across every helmet and screen. It showed archival footage of Dominion atrocities. Cities burning. Children screaming. Executions. Footage that had been scrubbed from public records, hidden deep inside encrypted vaults. Juggernaut had it all. Then the screen went black. His voice came through. I am not your rebellion. I am your mirror. Every screen you buried. Every truth you silenced. I carry it all. You erased my name. So I took yours. The broadcast ended, and the outpost was silent. No one moved. Talos, for the first time in years, frowned. He wasn't dealing with a terrorist. He was facing a walking reckoning. The psychological pressure doubled. 2 enforcers deserted their posts. One was caught trying to escape via a civilian smuggler route. Another detonated a charge near the ammo depot, killing himself and 2 comrades. The command structure splintered. Rax and Talos argued behind closed doors, their strategies clashing. Rax still believed brute force would end this. Talos knew better. Juggernaut wasn't trying to win a war. He was trying to unmake the Dominion from the inside. Piece by piece. Soul by soul. Back in the mines, the civilians began whispering again. This time, they weren't afraid. They were hopeful. A young boy painted Juggernaut's image on the walls, helmet cracked, fire behind him, fists clenched. They had stopped seeing him as a monster. He was a symbol now. Not just of vengeance, but of resilience. Talos saw it too. He understood the most dangerous threat wasn't Juggernaut's strength. It was the idea he had become. D now was a promise made in fire. One that ended with every Dominion flag reduced to ashes. The dreadnought arrived without ceremony, casting its massive shadow over the outpost as it descended through the upper atmosphere. It was an annihilator class, a flying fortress bristling with weaponry capable of leveling cities in minutes. Its engines screamed like thunder, and the ground shook beneath its weight. The Dominion didn't send these ships unless they meant to end something permanently. From orbit, Admiral Vron watched the chaos on the surface through a tactical feed, sipping a synthetic elixir as if he were observing a training exercise. To him, this wasn't war. It was cleanup. One rogue human, no matter how skilled, was no match for a mobile weapons platform that could erase mountain ranges with a single volley. He smiled at the reports of disrupted morale and called them amusing. He was here to correct a mistake, nothing more. As the dreadnought's support teams established forward outposts, Vron summoned both Commander Rax and Talos to a conference aboard the bridge. Rax arrived scowling, bruised pride evident in every movement. Talos walked in without expression, his synthetic implants humming softly. Vron mocked them both, calling their failures embarrassing. Talos simply stared. Rax clenched his fists. Vron declared that within 48 hours, the entire canyon would be scorched, the population reduced to ash, and Juggernaut's armor would hang in his trophy vault. No more subtlety. No more traps. Just fire. Juggernaut was already watching. From the ridge beyond the outpost, he tracked the dreadnought's descent, its support landers, and the new units patrolling in flawless formations. The Dominion had finally taken him seriously, but it was too late. The planet had changed. The people had changed. And Juggernaut had become more than just a soldier. He was a symbol, and symbols couldn't be bombed into silence. He moved with urgency, returning to the tunnels beneath the old mining facility, where the surviving civilians now worked in secret. Engineers and mechanics, once forced into silence by fear, now welded makeshift weapons and armor using scavenged Dominion parts. Juggernaut had brought them blueprints. Not of weapons, but of sabotage. Generators could be reversed. Drone cores could be corrupted. Even the dreadnought had blind spots. He taught them how to think like him, how to disappear, how to strike. They no longer waited to be saved. They prepared to fight. At dusk, the first real clash began. The dreadnought launched a bombardment targeting Juggernaut's last known position. Missiles rained from the sky, igniting the canyon in towering flames. The blast tore through rock and metal, leaving behind smoking craters. The Dominion declared him dead. Rax demanded confirmation. Talos, ever the cynic, remained silent. But Vron ordered a ground sweep anyway. No trace was found. No body. No signal. Only silence. Then came the breach. As Dominion forces returned from the sweep, alarms rang out from the dreadnought's primary hangar. Security teams raced in, weapons drawn. What they found shocked them. One of their dropships had been stripped down, rewired, and turned into a Trojan horse. Inside it, a timer counted down. 7 seconds later, a controlled blast disabled the entire hangar's energy field, grounding all aerial support. At the same moment, a series of explosions rocked the communication tower. The feed to Dominion Command went dark. Juggernaut had infiltrated the very heart of their operations and silenced the sky. In the chaos, the civilians struck. Makeshift armored rigs burst from hidden shafts beneath the outposts, piloted by engineers and miners. They weren't soldiers, but they had something the Dominion didn't. Desperation. One rig, barely holding together, crashed into a patrol group, crushing 3 enforcers before collapsing in flames. A woman with only one arm fired a harpoon cannon into a drone, dragging it to the ground as it exploded. A group of children, hiding in a ventilation shaft, dropped a payload of unstable ore into an ammunition crate, triggering a chain reaction that leveled half the supply depot. Talos responded immediately, cutting through resistance with precision strikes, but the enemy wasn't concentrated. They were everywhere. He moved like a machine, efficient and brutal, but for every one he stopped, another rose. It wasn't a rebellion anymore. It was an uprising, coordinated and burning with purpose. Juggernaut had given them the tools. The people gave it life. Then came the moment no one expected. Juggernaut didn't strike from the shadows this time. He walked into the open, past burning wreckage, through the heart of the enforcer line. He wore upgraded armor now, infused with Dominion tech, glowing with stolen energy. Plasma rifles fired at him. He deflected them. A heavy drone launched missiles. He caught one mid-flight and hurled it back, destroying the platform. He didn't speak. He didn't slow. He moved like judgment itself. Talos intercepted him near the command node. Their clash was seismic. Blades and fists collided with metal and flame. Sparks flew as Dominion engineering met raw human fury. Talos fought with discipline, enhanced reflexes and weaponized limbs. Juggernaut fought like an avalanche, unpredictable and overwhelming. They tore through barriers, shattered walls, dented steel. Finally, Talos managed to pierce Juggernaut's side. But Juggernaut didn't fall. He ripped the blade free, grabbed Talos by the throat, and slammed him into the power core. Sparks erupted. Systems failed. Talos collapsed, his implants overloading. Above them, the dreadnought panicked. With communications severed and the power grid failing, Vrun attempted to evacuate. But the launch systems were down. Juggernaut had already reached the bridge's override panel through a separate infiltration point. He left a GIF behind. A message displayed on every terminal. It was simple. Wrong war. A moment later, the dreadnought's thrusters went critical. The core had been tampered with using stolen Dominion code. There would be no explosion, only failure. The ship fell from the sky, its descent slow, inevitable, and humiliating. It slammed into the distant ridge, crumbling into itself with a metallic groan. No fireball. No glory. Just ruin. As dawn broke, the outpost stood half in flames, half in silence. Dominion banners lay in the dirt. Enforcers surrendered. Some removed their helmets and dropped their weapons. Others fled into the hills. The civilians gathered, wounded but alive. Miners. Mechanics. Farmers. Survivors. Juggernaut stood at the edge of the canyon, watching the horizon. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply turned and walked back toward the mines. His war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. Back in orbit, far from the wreckage, a lone Dominion surveillance drone recorded everything. The footage would never make it to the public. But it didn't need to. Across hundreds of occupied planets, whispers had already begun. A name passed from rebel to rebel, from prisoner to prisoner. A name the Dominion tried to erase. A name reborn in fire and steel. Juggernaut. Smoke still curled through the shattered valleys of Outpost D-17, clinging to the craters and mangled steel like a bitter fog. The dreadnought's broken carcass rested half-buried in a mountain's side, a monument to failure, scorched black and lifeless. What once represented unstoppable Dominion power now looked like a rusted fossil from a forgotten age. Among the wreckage, scavengers picked through the rubble for salvageable tech, carefully avoiding the bodies of officers too mangled to be buried with honor. Juggernaut had not been seen since the crash. No transmissions. No movement. Some whispered he had died in the final clash. Others said he had walked straight into the flames and vanished. But the people knew better. He wasn't gone. He was preparing. Deep below the surface, within the ancient mining tunnels now repurposed as a resistance stronghold, Juggernaut stood over a makeshift map etched into the concrete floor. Around him, engineers and former civilians worked like ants in a hive, turning scrap into machines, turning fear into firepower. The uprising was no longer a scattered spark. It was a blueprint, carefully constructed from pain and precision. Juggernaut had laid every piece himself. The drone codes he captured during his infiltration had given him access to Dominion relay satellites. The virus he planted during the dreadnought breach was still quietly gathering data, sending it back through untraceable civilian comms. Every move he had made since the first ambush had been a calculated step in a much larger game. While the Dominion saw a rogue soldier lashing out in chaos, Juggernaut had been building something far worse. A demonstration. He wanted them to feel it not just in their weapons, but in their confidence, their beliefs, their control. The outpost had never been the target. It had always been the stage. Far across the sector, on the Dominion frontier base known as Karen's Spine, Admiral Vrun's death had triggered emergency response measures. The Dominion War Council convened to assess the loss. The broadcast from the crashed dreadnought had not only been intercepted by Dominion Command but had leaked through the virus Juggernaut had embedded. Clips of the explosion. Footage of miners turning against their masters. Scenes of enforcers retreating. Worst of all was the final image, before the broadcast cut, Juggernaut walking calmly through fire, dragging the Dominion flag behind him like trash. The footage had been downloaded over 2 million times in the outer colonies before it was scrubbed. But digital fire spreads fast. The Council knew the damage wasn't tactical. It was symbolic. Something had broken. The illusion of control. Desperate to contain the spread, Dominion leadership authorized a planet-killer missile. A silent warhead designed not for detonation, but erasure. A zero-point implosion that would consume the outpost and leave nothing behind. Not even bones. The message would be clear. No martyrs. No stories. No heroes. Just a quiet silence where rebellion used to be. The missile was already en route, cloaked and untraceable, carried by an unmanned shuttle. But Juggernaut knew. One of the many pieces of data harvested during his infiltration included Dominion contingency protocols. Buried deep in code strings and encrypted files were clues to their last resort measures. When the sensor arrays on the old mining towers picked up an anomalous energy spike in orbit, he knew what it was. He didn't panic. He didn't call for help. He simply looked at the timer on his wrist. The missile would reach the outpost in less than 3 hours. There was no time for evacuation. No way to outrun a black hole bomb. Instead, he did the unthinkable. He ordered a broadcast to the Dominion itself. The message was short. A live feed, Juggernaut standing in front of a Dominion statue the civilians had toppled days earlier. His armor scorched, chest plate marked with Enforcer unit numbers painted over with red slashes. He looked directly into the camera, face obscured by his cracked helmet. You think we are your broken toys? You think silence will keep your power alive? You sent a warhead to erase a story. So I'm sending it back. The feed cut to static. Up in orbit, the warhead's guidance systems flickered. A reroute command was accepted. Unauthorized. Confirmed. The missile's trajectory altered mid-flight. Instead of descending toward D-17, it now climbed. Then turned. Then accelerated toward Karen's spine, its launch point. At Dominion Command, alarms erupted. Emergency override failed. Manual kill signal blocked. Someone inside had activated an old code buried beneath their own systems. One that shouldn't have existed anymore. Juggernaut. As the missile streaked through the void, Dominion warships scrambled. Too slow. The warhead tore through Karen's defense shield like wet paper. And then silence. The core detonated without fire. Just a flicker. A bending of space. And the entire base folded inward, swallowed by the void it created. An implosion. Clean. Quiet. Total. Back on D-17, the people stood in silence as the relay broadcast flickered in confirmation. The Dominion was now the one losing strongholds. And they had no idea how far the virus had spread. No idea how much of their own network had been poisoned. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen across the stars. On one occupied world, Dominion surveillance drones began playing human music over public squares. On another, a statue of a Dominion general was defaced overnight, replaced with a burning mark resembling Juggernaut's visor. Resistance cells that had gone quiet suddenly reactivated, citing the fall of the dreadnought. Entire sectors refused resource quotas. Governors defected. Soldiers turned their weapons on their own officers. The War Council met again. This time, in secrecy. They debated responses. Some wanted to flatten any world that even whispered Juggernaut's name. Others argued that only strategic diplomacy could quell what was growing. But none of it mattered. The myth had already spread. And at the center of it, Juggernaut remained silent. He didn't claim victory. He didn't build a government. He left the ruins of the outpost and walked into the desert alone, leaving behind instructions for defense and repair. When someone asked where he was going, he simply replied that there were more chains to break. Alone in the red dusk, Juggernaut walked beneath a sky filled with Dominion satellites, each one now infected with the story they tried to bury. Every step he took echoed with the weight of 1,000 voices they had tried to silence. He hadn't won the war. He had started something far worse. He had made it personal. The desert wind howled across the shattered remains of Outpost D-17, carrying with it the scent of scorched metal, disturbed earth, and the faint trace of ozone left by Dominion weapons that had failed to erase what they never understood. The outpost was no longer an outpost. It had become a memorial of resistance, a city rebuilt from ruins, stitched together by engineers, survivors, and ex-enforcers who had thrown their helmets into the fire. Dominion banners no longer flew. Instead, crude flags made from scrap cloth and painted with the jagged silhouette of Juggernaut's cracked helmet fluttered from the towers. There was no organized government, no declared leadership. The people made decisions together. Some spoke of freedom, some of revenge, but all of them spoke of the one who started it. Even though he was gone, his presence was everywhere. Juggernaut had become more than a soldier or a ghost. He was a signal. The Dominion tried to pretend nothing had changed. In their official statements, the destruction of Karen's spine was a systems failure. The dreadnought's fall was blamed on sabotage by internal defectors. Juggernaut's name was forbidden in every official broadcast. Enforcer recruits were instructed that he never existed. But on the outer worlds, that lie fell apart quickly. It was hard to deny a story already carved into 100 cities. Every colony that had suffered under the Dominion now carried whispers of a man who turned death into fuel and silence into fire. Resistance cells began forming on worlds that had been dormant for years. Dominion loyalists found themselves surrounded not by battlefields, but by citizens who had decided they would rather die with purpose than live under control. Small uprisings started to erupt, seemingly uncoordinated but always bearing the same signs: sabotaged command towers, hacked broadcasts, and a message scrawled on walls in red paint or fire ash. We remember. The Dominion scrambled to respond. A second fleet was deployed to Sector 9 where mining revolts had crippled their fuel output. Another fleet went to the ocean world of Veltra where shipyard workers had walked out in unison and barricaded the orbital ports. Each time the enforcers landed, they were greeted not with open resistance, but with silence, as if the people were waiting for something. They never fought first. They never declared war. But they never cooperated either. They just waited, quiet and calm, watching the skies. It unsettled the soldiers in ways bullets never could. Eventually, Dominion High Command began to suspect that Juggernaut was no longer a single person. They believed he had trained others, passed on his knowledge like a virus. Some even believed he had died long ago, and the persona had been adopted by a movement. This made the truth even more dangerous. Because the truth was simpler and far worse. He was alive. He just didn't care if they knew anymore. On the frozen moon of Caldrex, a surveillance team spotted him during a supply raid. Alone, armored, brutal, and silent. He disarmed 3 patrols, destroyed a weapons cache, and left a message in the snow. You had your chance. I gave you a warning. The satellite footage leaked before Dominion could cover it. Within hours, uprisings flared on Caldrex's 3 major colonies. The enforcer barracks were burned to the ground using stolen fuel tanks. 2 Dominion officers were tried in public tribunals. The name Juggernaut was shouted like a battle cry as civilians stormed fortified zones. In response, Dominion leadership escalated to martial law in 17 systems. Broadcasts threatened orbital strikes. Cities were blockaded. Food shipments were withheld. But instead of fear, the result was rage. Entire communities began rationing together, forming civilian militias, converting old mining gear into mobile armor. The story of D-17 was retold in 100 ways, passed from mouth to mouth, distorted by myth and memory, but always ending with the same line. He warned them. They didn't listen. Back on D-17, life moved forward. Farms were being rebuilt using tech once reserved for elite Dominion colonies. Children were being taught not only to read and write, but to defend themselves, to hack systems, to understand how empires fall when the people beneath them stop being afraid. The crater where the dreadnought fell had become a training ground. Ex-enforcers who had defected now taught young recruits how to fight back not with brute force, but with cleverness, with sabotage, with message warfare. The air still smelled of ash and oil, but now it also smelled of fresh construction and dry laughter. One evening, as the twin suns dipped behind the rusted hills, a child stood at the edge of the crater holding a drawing. It was a sketch of Juggernaut, rough and exaggerated, towering over broken Dominion ships, his cracked helmet like a crown. The child taped it to a piece of metal and stuck it in the ground. Around her, dozens of others had done the same. Art, names, stories, all left behind as if they were laying down offerings. No one asked them to do it. They just did. Because they remembered. And far beyond the reaches of the outpost, in a system not yet touched by open rebellion, A new Enforcer squad landed on what appeared to be a peaceful agricultural moon. Their scans showed no weapons, no resistance, just silence. They descended in full formation, weapons hot, helmets gleaming. At first, the villagers watched them without speaking. Then one of them walked forward. A farmer. She held a tattered red cloth. When she opened it, it revealed a metal plate, cracked and scorched, with one word etched across it. Juggernaut. The enforcers raised their weapons, but it was already too late. Explosions erupted from beneath the landing zone. Not large. Just enough to knock their formation into disarray. The villagers scattered. Not in fear but in motion. As if they had trained for this. From the edge of the forest, a figure emerged. Large, armored, and walking without hurry. One of the enforcers shouted a warning. Another fired. The figure didn't flinch. It stepped into the light. The helmet was different now. Sleeker. The armor was rebuilt. But the presence was unmistakable. The enforcers opened fire. The figure didn't stop. Bullets ricocheted. Screams echoed. And then silence again. Later, when Dominion tried to access the feed, they found only a static screen with the words "You never learn." The footage ended. No survivors were reported. Some say Juggernaut was no longer human. Others say he was a phantom made real by the hatred of those crushed under boots too long. But the Dominion learned the one truth they could not erase. You can kill a soldier. You can burn a town. You can silence a voice. But you cannot kill a story once the people choose to believe it. And Juggernaut had become a story they would never stop fearing. In the end, the empire that had ruled with precision and terror for centuries found itself haunted not by a fleet or an army, but by one man who refused to die, who refused to forget, and who taught the rest of the galaxy how to remember. The war was far from over. But the scales had shifted. And as long as one person stood and whispered that name, the Dominion would never sleep peacefully again. Ask ChatGPT.